The sheet music lay there, on the piano that hadn't been touched in 8 years, Moonlight Sonata, Beethoven, marked with spots of fresh tears. But in that house, no one knew how to play the piano. No one, except Grandpa, and he couldn't even remember his own name anymore. David Salazar was 52 years old and had a fortune built from raising skyscrapers in 40 countries. Salazar Group, one of the most respected names in construction throughout Latin America. But that morning, standing in front of the mahogany desk in his 32nd floor office overlooking all of Mexico City, David wasn't thinking about contracts or bids. He was thinking about a phone call he'd received 3 hours earlier. His grandfather had tried to leave the house again, at 4 in the morning, barefoot, in his pajamas. The night nurse found him in the garden, weeping, saying he had to get to the concert on time, that the students were waiting for him, that he was never late. There was no concert, there were no students, just an 82-year-old man whose brain had forgotten the last 7 years of his life. Vascular dementia, the doctors had said, degenerative, irreversible. The words doctors use when they have nothing left to offer. If you've ever felt like the world is taking someone from you piece by piece and you can't do anything to stop it, then you know why David closed his eyes at that moment. Because it hurts. It hurts in a way that money can't buy and buildings can't cover. Maestro Ernest Salazar, that's what they called him. Not Grandpa, not Mr. Salazar, Maestro. 50-year career as a classical pianist, professor at the National Conservatory for 30 years, 300 students who passed through his hands, recitals at the Palace of Fine Arts, the Degollado Theatre, Carnegie Hall in New York City in 1985. But that was then. Before the words started to slip from his mouth like water through his fingers, before he stopped recognizing his own family, before his hands, those hands that had played for presidents and ambassadors, forgot how to move across the keys. 8 years. 8 years without touching a single note. David hung up the phone with his assistant and made a decision. He needed help. Real help. The night nurse was doing what she could, but it wasn't enough. His grandfather needed someone during the day. Someone who could be there when the confusion hit, when the false memories dragged him back to a past that no longer existed. 3 days later, Emily Carter rang the doorbell of the Salazar residence at 7 in the morning. 46 years old, hair pulled back in an impeccable braid, navy blue uniform pressed with a precision that spoke of discipline, and in her eyes, something David couldn't identify at that moment, something that looked like old sadness. Sadness that had already made peace with the pain. The agency had recommended her. 15 years of experience, impeccable references, specialized in elder care. David interviewed her in the living room next to the black grand piano that had been covered with a white sheet for years. "Do you have experience with dementia patients?" David asked, directly because he didn't have time to beat around the bush. Emily nodded. "My father, Alzheimer's. He passed away 4 years ago." David saw something cross her face. A ghost, but so quick he almost imagined it. "And that doesn't bother you?" he asked. "Working with someone who has the same condition?" Emily looked directly at him. "On the contrary, it's exactly why I'm here." David didn't understand the answer at that moment, but he hired her anyway. Because there was something in the way Emily spoke, in the quiet firmness of her voice, that told him this woman knew exactly what ground she was treading on. The first day, Emily met Maestro Ernest. He was sitting in his chair by the study window, looking at the garden with eyes that seemed to see something no one else could see. His hair was completely white, combed straight back, and his hands rested on the armrests, still, as if they'd forgotten they ever had a purpose. "Good morning, Maestro," Emily said, approaching slowly. Ernest looked at her. For a second, his eyes seemed to focus. But then, nothing. Just the emptiness of someone who is there, but isn't. "Have the students arrived yet?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "No, Maestro, there are no classes today." "There are always classes," he replied, irritated. Always, I have to prepare." And he tried to get up, but his legs didn't respond as he expected. Emily held him gently without forcing, just guiding. "Of course, maestro. But first, let's have some breakfast. The students can wait a little longer." And so, with the patience of someone who had walked this path before, Emily began to care for a man who didn't know who she was, who didn't know who he himself was. During the first 2 weeks, Emily followed the routine. Breakfast at 8, medication at 9, walk in the garden at 10, lunch at 1, nap at 2, everything measured, everything controlled, everything designed so that Ernest would have the least amount of confusion possible. But there was something that Emily noticed from day one, something that no one else had seen. In the study, covered with a white sheet as if it were a corpse, there was a grand piano, a Steinway & Sons Model D, one of the best pianos in the world, and it was there, silent, gathering dust as if it had never been important. One day, while cleaning the study, Emily lifted the sheet, just a little, enough to see the keys, black and white, perfectly aligned, waiting. And then she saw something else. On the piano, half hidden among old scores, there was a framed photograph. Emily took it carefully. It was a black and white image, taken in a huge theater. A young man in a black suit, bowing before a standing audience. The sign behind him read, "Carnegie Hall, New York City, 1985. The man in the photograph was Ernest, but not the Ernest of now. It was the Ernest of then, the one with fire in his eyes, the one who made people cry with Chopin. Emily looked at the photograph. Then she looked towards the window where Ernest was sitting, lost in his own world, and she made a decision. That night, before leaving, Emily asked the night nurse, "Does Mr. Ernest still have moments of clarity?" The nurse shook her head. "Not in 3 years. Sometimes he says single words, sometimes he cries for no reason. But recognize someone, understand where he is? No, that doesn't happen anymore." Emily nodded, but she didn't say anything else. The next day, Emily arrived an hour early. 6 in the morning, the house still smelled of the previous night's freshly brewed coffee. The curtains were drawn, the dawn light barely seeped through the windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. No one saw Emily enter the study. No one saw her walk slowly towards the piano as if entering a sacred temple. No one saw her sit on the red velvet bench, worn smooth by years of use. No one saw her carefully open the lid, almost reverently, revealing the ivory keys. Yellowed with age, Emily placed her hands on the keys. They were cold. No one had touched them in 8 years. She took a deep breath. The study smelled of old books and varnished wood, of silence, of time standing still. And then Emily broke that silence. The opening chords of Claire de Lune filled the study, soft, slow, like water trickling over stones. The sound echoed off the book-lined walls, creating an almost sacred atmosphere. Emily had studied piano for 10 years as a girl. From 8 to 18, she had dreamed of being a concert pianist, but life, as it often does, had other plans. Her mother grew ill, the money ran out, the lessons stopped, and the dream was tucked away in a drawer, along with the sheet music she never opened again. But fingers don't forget, not completely. Claire de Lune, Beethoven, Sonata No. 14. The piece every piano student learns, the piece that breaks hearts, even when played poorly. Emily played slowly, with mistakes, with pauses, but she played. And then she heard something behind her, a sob. Emily stopped playing immediately. She turned around. Ernest was there, standing in the doorway of the study, holding onto the doorframe for support, tears streaming down his wrinkled face. He said nothing. He just wept, as if something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, had just awakened for a single fleeting second. Emily stood up quickly, startled. "Maestro, are you all right?" But Ernest didn't answer. He just stared at the piano and cried. If this story is touching something inside you, something you maybe didn't know was still there, don't let it pass you by. Sometimes we need someone to remind us that miracles aren't always grand. Sometimes they're just a song. And if you want us to keep telling stories that make you feel like humanity still exists, you can support us with a super thanks. It's not required, but if you do, we'll know this matters. Emily helped Ernest back to his chair. She brought him water. She dabbed his tears with a handkerchief, but she didn't ask any questions because she knew Ernest had no answers. He only had emotions that his brain could no longer explain. That night, Emily opened an old notebook she kept in her purse, a blue-covered notebook she'd bought years ago to write down recipes. But now, she would use it for something different. On the first page, she wrote, "Day 1, Claire de Lune wept for 4 minutes, did not speak, but felt something." And that's how it all began. Emily started arriving an hour early every day, 6 in the morning, when the house was still silent, when no one else was awake. She sat down at the piano and played. Not always Claire de Lune. Sometimes she played Chopin nocturnes, sometimes she played Bach preludes, sometimes she played pieces she didn't even know she still remembered. And Ernest, somehow, always appeared. Sometimes he stayed in the doorway, listening. Sometimes he came closer and sat in a chair beside the piano. Sometimes he closed his eyes and moved his fingers in the air as if he too were playing, as if his hands remembered something his mind had forgotten. Emily documented everything, each reaction, each tear, each murmur. Day 15, Beethoven Sonata Pathétique, moved fingers for 2 minutes, said one word, beautiful. Day 22, Chopin Nocturne in E-flat major, closed eyes, smiled. First smile in 3 weeks, according to the night nurse. Day 34, Bach, Prelude in C major, said a name, Sophia. The nurse says it was his wife. She died 12 years ago. David knew none of this. He kept coming home late, kissing his grandfather's forehead without getting any response, and leaving early the next day. The routine of a busy man who loved, but had no time. But then, something changed. One afternoon, David came home at 6, somewhat unusual. He had a meeting cancelled. He entered the living room and looked for Emily. "How was he today?" he asked. "As always. Quiet," Emily replied. "Ate well. Slept through his nap." David nodded, but then something made him stop. "Has my grandfather said anything lately?" Emily looked at him cautiously. "Sometimes he says single words." "What kind of words?" Emily hesitated. "Names, places, things from the past." David frowned. "And that's normal?" Emily chose her words carefully. "In patients with dementia, music sometimes activates memories. It's a documented phenomenon." "Music?" David asked. "What music?" Emily swallowed. Sometimes I play classical music for him. I thought it might calm him." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. David looked at her for a long moment, then he nodded. "Okay, if it helps him, go ahead." And Emily breathed again. But that night, David couldn't sleep. Something about the conversation troubled him. Music. His grandfather had been a musician. Of course, music would do something for him. Why hadn't anyone thought of that before? The next morning, David decided to do something he hadn't done in months. Come home early, very early. 6:30 in the morning. David opened the front door carefully, without making a sound. The house was silent. But then he heard something that shouldn't be there. Piano. Someone was playing the piano. David walked slowly towards the study, his heart beating faster than it should, because in that house, no one played the piano. No one, except the study door was ajar. David approached and peeked inside. Emily was sitting at the piano, playing. Her fingers moved with a grace David hadn't expected. It wasn't perfect, But it was real. It was music. And beside the piano, in a chair, was his grandfather, with his eyes closed, moving his fingers in the air, as if he were playing along with her. David stood paralyzed because he hadn't seen his grandfather do that in 8 years. 8 years. Emily finished the piece. Silence. And then Ernest opened his eyes. He looked at Emily and said something David heard perfectly from the doorway. "My wife used to play that song." Emily smiled, and with tears in her eyes. "I know, maestro. It was Nocturne number 2, Chopin, her favorite." Ernest nodded, as if, for a moment, he remembered, as if, for a second, he was himself again. And then, the moment passed, and Ernest slipped back into the fog, but David had seen him, he had heard him, and he knew something was happening, something he didn't understand, but that he couldn't ignore. David waited for Emily to leave the study. He didn't want to interrupt. He didn't want to shatter whatever he had just witnessed. So he stayed there, hidden behind the door, feeling like an intruder in his own house. When Emily finally emerged, guiding Ernest back to his room for breakfast, David entered the study. The piano was still open, the keys still warm, and on the music stand, an old yellowed score. With handwritten annotations in blue ink, David carefully picked it up. It was Claire de Lune, and in the upper margin, in perfect penmanship, it read, "For Sophie, December 1978. With all my love, Ernest." David closed his eyes. His grandmother, Sophie, had passed away 12 years ago. Cancer. Swift. Painful. His grandfather had never been the same afterward. He stopped teaching a year later, stopped playing 2 years later, and 3 years later vascular dementia arrived like a thief in the night. But this score had been played recently. David could see it. The tear stains were fresh, not 12 years old, minutes old. Something inside David broke at that moment, because he realized something terrible. His grandfather still loved, still felt, still remembered, even if only for seconds. And David had been so busy building empires that he had missed it. That afternoon, David cancelled all his meetings, something he never did, and he stayed home, observing, waiting, trying to understand. Emily continued with her normal routine: breakfast, medication, a stroll in the garden. But David was noticing things now, small things that had previously gone unseen. The way Emily spoke to Ernest, not as if he were a child, not as if he were ill, but as if he were a maestro, with respect, with dignity. The way Ernest looked at her sometimes, as if, in some corner of his confused brain, he knew that she was different, that she understood something that no one else did. And the way Emily touched his arm when Ernest got lost in his thoughts, gentle, present, as if saying, "I'm here, you're not alone." At the end of the day, as Emily was about to leave, David stopped her. "I need to talk to you." Emily tensed, as if she knew this moment was coming. They sat in the living room, the same place where David had interviewed her weeks ago, but now everything was different. "I saw you this morning," David said bluntly, "playing the piano with my grandfather." Emily said nothing. She just waited. "How long have you been doing this?" Emily hesitated, then replied, in a firm voice, 43 days. David blinked. 43 days. Every day? Emily nodded. "I arrive an hour early, at 6. I play for 45 minutes. He always appears. I don't know how, but he always does." "And why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought you'd fire me." "Why would I fire you?" Emily looked directly at him. "Because you're not paying me to play the piano. You're paying me to take care of your grandfather. And technically, I'm using your piano without permission, arriving before my shift without charging overtime, doing something that's not in my contract." David remained silent for a long moment. Then he asked, "Why do you do it?" Emily lowered her gaze. Because my father had Alzheimer's, and when he no longer recognized me, when he no longer knew my name, I would sing to him songs from when I was a child, and for a second, for one damn second, his eyes would light up, as if something inside him remembered. He didn't remember me, but he remembered the song, and that was enough. Her voice cracked a little at the end. David saw tears in her eyes, but Emily didn't let them fall. When I saw the photograph of your grandfather at Carnegie Hall, Emily continued, when I knew that he had been a pianist, I knew I had to try, because maybe, just maybe, the music could reach him where words no longer can. David felt something tightening in his throat. And does it work? Emily took something out of her bag, a blue notebook with worn covers. She placed it on the table. Read, she said simply. David opened the notebooks and began to read. Day 1, Claire de Lune. He cried for 4 minutes, didn't speak, but he felt something. Day 7, Beethoven, Sonata Pathétique. He moved his hands as if he were playing with me. Day 15, first words, beautiful. Day 22, first smile in weeks. Day 34, he said his wife's name, Sophie. Day 40. Today he looked at me and said, thank you. Page after page, 43 days documented with the precision of a scientist and the heart of an artist. Each piece of music, each reaction, each small miracle. David finished reading and closed the notebook slowly. He didn't trust his voice to speak. I know it's not a cure, Emily said, breaking the silence. I know that dementia doesn't stop with Chopin, but Mr. Salazar, your grandfather is in there. Maybe not all the time, maybe only for seconds, but he's there, and he deserves someone to look for him. What would you do if you discovered that someone was caring for your family member in a way that you never thought possible? If you discovered that a stranger was doing what you, with all your money and power, couldn't do? Would you feel gratitude, or would you feel shame? Don't lie. Shame hurts more than any failure. David took a breath. Then he asked, what do you need? Emily blinked, confused. I'm sorry? What do you need to keep doing this? A piano tuner? New sheet music? Better lighting in the studio? Tell me what you need and you'll have it tomorrow. Emily looked at him as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. You're not going to fire me. It wasn't a question, but David answered anyway. Firing you would be the stupidest thing I've ever done in my life. And I've done a lot of stupid things. Believe me. But this won't be one of them. Emily let out a sigh that seemed to have been holding back for weeks. There's something else, David said. I want to be present. Tomorrow. When you play. I want to see. Emily nodded. Okay, but you have to stay still and quiet. If he sees you, if he gets distracted, the moment breaks. Understood. And that was how David Salazar, CEO of a company with a presence in 40 countries, began waking up at 5:30 in the morning to listen to his employee play piano for his grandfather. The first morning that David was present, he sat in the darkest corner of the study, almost hidden behind a bookshelf. Emily entered at 6 o'clock sharp. As always, she sat down at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. Today it was Chopin's Nocturne, number 2-2, the piece that Sophie loved, and just as Emily had said, Ernest appeared. No one called for him. No one went looking, but there he was, walking slowly from his room, holding onto the handrail, his eyes fixed on the piano as if it were a beacon in the fog. David held his breath. Ernest sat down on the chair beside the piano. He closed his eyes and began to move his fingers in the air, not randomly, not without purpose, but following the melody, playing the notes Emily was playing, as if his hands remembered something his mind had forgotten. And then David saw something that shattered him, a tear rolling down his grandfather's wrinkled face. Slowly, silently, Ernest was crying, not from sadness, not from confusion, but from something deeper, something that had no words. only music. When Emily finished playing, there was silence. Ernest opened his eyes. He looked at Emily and said in a clear voice, "Sophia, my Sophia." He wasn't talking to Emily. He was talking to the memory, to the ghost of his wife who lived in those notes. Emily took Ernest's hand gently. "She's here, maestro, in the music. She's always here." Ernest nodded, and for a moment, David saw his grandfather smile, a small smile, broken but real. Then the moment passed, and Ernest returned to the fog. But David had seen it. He had seen his grandfather return, even if only for an instant. That night, David couldn't work. He sat in his office, looking at the city through the window, with Emily's blue notebook in his hands. 43 days. 43 days of Emily arriving early, without charging, without asking for anything in return, doing what love does when no one is watching. And David, with all his wealth, with all his buildings and contracts, hadn't done anything. He had only been absent, occupied, convinced that money was enough to take care of someone. But it wasn't. It never was. The next day, David did 3 things. First, he called the best piano tuner in the city and paid him triple to come that very day. The Steinway hadn't been tuned in 8 years. That was going to change. Second, he went to a bookstore specializing in music and bought all the sheet music of the pieces Sophia used to play. Clair de Lune, Chopin's Nocturnes, Bach's Preludes, Satie's Gymnopédies, everything. And third, and this was the hardest, David sat down with Emily and told her something he never thought he'd say. "Teach me." "Excuse me?" Emily asked. "Teach me to play the piano. I don't have to be good. I want to be able to play something for him. Even if it's just one song, even if it's bad, I want him to know I'm trying." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "All right, but I warn you, it's going to be frustrating. Your fingers are going to ache, and it's going to sound awful at first." "I don't care. Why now?" Emily asked. "Why after all these years?" David chose his words carefully. "Because he raised me. When my parents died, I was 8 years old, and he gave up his career, gave up his concerts, and raised me alone. He played piano in bars on the weekends to pay for my school. And when I told him I wanted to study engineering instead of music, I saw the disappointment in his eyes. But he never said anything. He just supported me." David paused, his voice cracking. "And I never learned. I never gave him that. It was his only disappointment. And now maybe it's too late, but I have to try." Emily put a hand on David's shoulder. "It's never too late, Mr. Salazar. Never." And so, something strange began. Every morning, at 6 o'clock, Emily played for Ernest, and every evening, at 7 o'clock, after Ernest was asleep, Emily gave David piano lessons. David was terrible. His fingers were clumsy, his rhythm a disaster. But he practiced 2 hours every night, as if his life depended on it, because in a way, it did. Not his life, but his redemption. The weeks passed. Emily's blue notebook kept growing. Day 52, day 61, day 78, and each day, something small changed in Ernest. It wasn't a cure. The vascular dementia was still there, stealing pieces of his memory, confusing him, dragging him to worlds that no longer existed. But there were moments, seconds, where the music brought him back. Some people are going to pause this video here because they already know how it ends, because they think miracles don't exist. But if you stay, if you give this story a chance, maybe you'll understand that miracles aren't always grand. Sometimes they're just 8 notes. And if you want to support stories that remind you that humanity still exists, you can leave us a super thanks. You don't have to. But if you do, we'll know that this means something to you too. David changed his entire life in those months. He started working from home 3 days a week. He delegated responsibilities he never thought he could delegate. And for the first time in 20 years, he was home before 8 o'clock at night, not just to practice piano, but to be present, to have dinner with his grandfather, even if Ernest didn't know who he was, to sit with him in the garden, in silence, just keeping him company, to learn that love doesn't always need words. Emily noticed the change, and one afternoon, as she was collecting the teacups after lunch, she said something to David that he would never forget. "Your grandfather doesn't know who you are, Mr. Salazar, but he knows that you are here, and that matters more than you think." David felt a lump in his throat. "How do you know?" Emily smiled. "Because when you arrive, he smiles. I don't know if he's conscious of it, but he does, as if something inside him recognizes that he's not alone anymore." 3 months after Emily started playing piano for Ernest, something extraordinary happened. It was a Saturday morning. David had cancelled a business trip to Colombia, something that would have cost him millions. But he didn't care anymore. The millions could wait. His grandfather couldn't. Emily played that morning as always, Clair de Lune, the piece with which it had all begun. Ernest was sitting in his chair with his eyes closed, moving his fingers in the air, but this time, something was different. When Emily finished the piece, Ernest didn't return to the fog immediately. He stayed there, with his eyes closed, with his hands still suspended in the air, as if he were holding something invisible, and then slowly, very slowly, Ernest stood up. Emily and David looked at each other, alarmed. Ernest never stood up alone. He always needed help, but now he was standing, walking, step by step towards the piano. Emily got up quickly, making space for him. Ernest approached the piano as if he were walking in a dream. He reached out his hand. He touched the keys with one finger, softly, tremulously, and then something happened that no one expected. Ernest sat down at the piano. He placed both hands on the keys, and he played. Not the entire piece, not perfectly, but he played. 8 notes, slow, trembling, but unmistakable. The first 8 notes of Clair de Lune, for the first time in 8 years. David stood there, frozen. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He could only watch, tears streaming down his face as his grandfather, the man who had forgotten his own name, played the piano again. Emily had a hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. Ernest played the 8 notes, and then he stopped. He stared at his hands as if he didn't recognize them, as if he didn't understand how they had done that. And then, in a raspy voice, he said something that David etched into his memory forever. "Sophia, where's Sophia?" Ernest wasn't speaking to Emily. He wasn't speaking to David. He was speaking to the past, to the ghost of his wife, whom he had loved for 50 years. "She's here, maestro," Emily said, her voice breaking. "In the music. She's always been here." Ernest nodded, as if that made sense, as if that was enough. And then, the moment passed. Ernest returned to his confusion. He looked around, disoriented. "Where am I?" he asked. "You're home, maestro," Emily replied, guiding him back to his chair. "You're home." But David couldn't move. He was still there, standing, his heart shattered and pieced back together all at once. Because he had just witnessed a miracle. Not the kind that doctors acknowledge, not the kind that gets published in scientific journals, but the kind that only love can create. That afternoon, David did something he hadn't done in his adult life. He cried, not just a few tears, but a full-blown cry, sitting in his office with the door closed, crying like a child, because he realized something devastating. He had spent 52 years of his life chasing things, buildings, contracts, money, power, things he thought mattered, things that would give him worth, things that would prove that he was worth the sacrifice his grandfather had made for him. But none of it mattered. It never mattered. The only thing that mattered was in that blue notebook. 89 days of Emily arriving early. 89 days of silent love. 89 days of someone seeing his grandfather not as a sick man, but as a maestro. And David, with all his money, hadn't seen that. He needed a stranger to show it to him. That night, David asked Emily to stay after her shift. They needed to talk. They sat in the study next to the piano that was now open, tuned, alive again. "I want to increase your salary," David said. "By triple." Emily blinked. "Mr. Salazar, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. You're doing something that no one else could do, something that I should have done years ago, and you deserve to be compensated." Emily shook her head. "I don't do this for money." "I know. That's why you deserve more." There was a silence. Then Emily asked, "Can I ask for something instead of the raise?" "Anything." Emily took a deep breath. "I want you to keep coming. Every morning. I want you to be present when I play." Because he doesn't recognize it with his eyes, but he recognizes it with his soul. And I think it's healing you as much as it's healing him. David felt something break inside his chest. In a good way. Deal. The weeks continued to pass. Ernest didn't play the piano again after that day, but David knew it didn't matter. It had happened once, and that was enough. It was proof that something inside his grandfather was still alive, still feeling, still remembering. Day 100. Emily documented that day in more detail than any other. "Today, when I finished playing, Maestro Ernest opened his eyes and looked directly at me, not with the usual confusion, but with clarity, for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of total lucidity. And he said, 'Thank you for not forgetting me.' Then, the fog returned, but those 3 seconds were enough. David read that entry that night, and he knew he had to do something more, something big. The next day, David called a neurologist friend of his, Dr. Ramirez, one of the best dementia specialists in all of Latin America. "I need you to come to my house," David told him. "I have to show you something." Dr. Ramirez arrived 2 days later. David explained everything. Emily's 89 days, Ernest's reactions, the 8 notes he played after 8 years. The doctor listened with professional skepticism, but he agreed to stay one morning to observe. At 6 o'clock the next morning, Dr. Ramirez was sitting in the corner of the study next to David. Emily entered as usual. She sat down at the piano and began to play Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major. And as always, Ernest appeared, walking slowly, sitting in his chair, closing his eyes, moving his fingers in the air. Dr. Ramirez observed with clinical attention, but David saw the exact moment when the skepticism turned into awe. It was when Ernest, with his eyes still closed, began to murmur something. "Sophia, my Sophia, I love you." Clear words, coherent, full of emotion. When the session ended, Dr. Ramirez remained silent for a long moment. Then he said something that David never expected to hear from a scientist. "This shouldn't be possible." "What do you mean?" Dr. Ramirez took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly, as if he needed time to process what he had just seen. Vascular dementia destroys neural connections. It's irreversible, but there's something fascinating. Musical memory is stored in a different part of the brain, and in some very rare cases, that part can remain intact even when everything else is destroyed. What I just saw is a phenomenon documented in medical literature, but it's extremely rare, and I've never seen it in person. The doctor looked at Emily, who was serving tea for Ernest in the kitchen. "That woman isn't just playing the piano. She's accessing the only part of your grandfather's brain that still works. She's using music as a bridge to memories that would otherwise be lost forever." "And the words?" David asked. "The complete sentences?" The doctor nodded. "Music activates emotions, and emotions can sometimes activate language. It's not permanent, but for those seconds, your grandfather is really here, really present." David felt chills. "Is there a way to do this with other patients?" The doctor thought for a moment. There should be. If this works with your grandfather, it could work with others. But we'd need protocol, documentation, studies. I'll finance it, David said without hesitating. Everything you need, hospitals, equipment, personnel, whatever it may be. And so, in that study, next to a piano that had been silent for 8 long years, something was born. Something that would change the lives of hundreds of people. But David still had something more to do, something personal. If you felt nothing with what you just heard, if you didn't get goosebumps when that man played the piano after 8 years, then you need to check if you still have a soul, because this isn't just a story. It's proof that love can reach places where medicine gives up. And if you think someone else needs to hear this, share it. Because there are millions of families struggling with dementia, and they deserve to know that there's still hope. David practiced for 6 months, every night, 2 hours, sometimes 3. His fingers bled at first, his wrists ached, but he didn't stop, because he had a goal, a song, a single song that he wanted to be able to play for his grandfather. Clair de Lune, Moonlight. The song that Ernest had dedicated to Sophia, the song that Emily had played that first day, the song that had awakened something in his grandfather that everyone thought was dead. Emily was patient, more patient than David deserved. She corrected him without judging. She encouraged him when he wanted to give up. And slowly, very slowly, David learned it wouldn't be perfect, but it would be real. And that was what mattered. Day 147. That was the day David chose. That morning, David asked Emily not to play, just to sit with Ernest, to keep him company, because today he would play. David sat down at the piano. His hands were trembling. His heart was pounding as if he were about to give the most important performance of his life. And in a way, he was. He took a deep breath, placed his fingers on the keys, and began to play. Clair de Lune, Moonlight. It wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, skipped notes. The rhythm wasn't exact, but he played with all his heart, with all the soul he had forgotten he had. And Ernest, sitting in his chair, opened his eyes, not with confusion, not with fear, but with something that resembled recognition. David kept playing, with tears falling onto the keys, because this wasn't just music. It was an apology. It was a thank you. It was everything he never knew how to say with words. When he finished, there was silence, and then Ernest spoke, in a clear voice, clearer than it had been in years. "You play well, son." David froze. Son. His grandfather had called him son. He didn't know if Ernest truly recognized him. He didn't know if it was a moment of lucidity or just a random word. But it didn't matter, because in that moment David felt something he hadn't felt since he was 8 years old and his parents died. He felt like he had a home. Emily was crying silently in her chair because she knew exactly what that moment meant, not just for Ernest, but for David, for the boy who had grown up too fast, for the man who had forgotten how to be human. David got up from the piano. He knelt in front of his grandfather, took his wrinkled hands in his own. "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything, for raising me, for loving me, for teaching me that worth isn't in what you build, but in who you love." Ernest didn't respond. Maybe he didn't understand the words, but he squeezed David's hands with a strength he shouldn't have possessed. And in that silence, in that hand squeeze, David received the forgiveness he didn't know he needed. The forgiveness for the absent years, for the missed birthdays, for the conversations they never had, for the piano he never learned when his grandfather could still teach him, all forgiven. In 8 badly played notes, in a son who finally came home. The following months were different. David reduced his workload by 50%, appointed a co-CEO, something the shareholders didn't understand, something the business press criticized, but David no longer cared what others thought, because he had discovered something that no building could give him: purpose. Every morning at 6 o'clock, David was in the study. Sometimes Emily played, sometimes David played, sometimes they played together in an imperfect but beautiful duet. And Ernest always appeared, always, as if the music were a magnet pulling his soul back to reality, even if only for minutes. Emily continued documenting everything in her blue notebook, but now she had help. David had hired a research team, neurologists, music therapists, psychologists specializing in dementia, and together they created something that no one had done before: a music therapy protocol specifically designed for patients with dementia, based on Emily's notebook, on her 89 days of observations, on Ernest's reactions, on the science behind the phenomenon that Dr. Ramirez had witnessed. They called it the Ernest Protocol, in honor of the man who, unknowingly, had become patient zero for something revolutionary. David invested $10 million of his own money in the project, bought instruments, hired staff, rented space in a hospital, and began offering free music therapy for 200 dementia patients a year. Emily was appointed Director of Music Therapy. Her salary increased fivefold, but more importantly than that, her story, her father's story, the story of all the nights she sang to him while he forgot her name, finally had a purpose. It hadn't been in vain. None of it had been in vain. The first patient they treated after Ernest was a 74-year-old woman named Beverly, advanced Alzheimer's. She hadn't recognized her family in 2 years. Emily played for her for 3 months, and one day, while La Vie en Rose was playing, Beverly opened her eyes and said her daughter's name for the first time in 2 years. Her daughter cried so much that they had to stop the session, but they were tears of gratitude, of hope, of something she thought was lost forever. And so, one by one, patient by patient, the Ernest Protocol began to change lives. It wasn't a cure. It never would be a cure. Dementia was still dementia. Degenerative, irreversible, devastating. But now families had something more than pain. They had moments, seconds of lucidity, words they thought they would never hear again, smiles they thought they had seen for the last time. And for someone who is watching a loved one slowly disappear, those seconds are everything. This story shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be necessary, because we should be investing more in dementia research. We should be treating our seniors better. We should be valuing the people who care for them more. But until that happens, stories like this are a reminder that hope still exists. And if you'd like to support content like this, content that not only entertains but inspires, you can leave us a super thanks. Every contribution helps us continue telling the stories that others ignore. 2 years after Emily started playing piano for Ernest, the Blue Notebook contained 743 entries. 743 days of music, of love, of never giving up. Ernest was still alive, but the vascular dementia had progressed. He no longer got up on his own. He no longer walked. He spent most of the day asleep, but when Emily played, he still opened his eyes. He still moved his fingers. Still, now and then, he'd whisper a name: Sophia. One October morning, Emily arrived at the study as usual. At 6 o'clock sharp, David was already there, sitting in his usual chair, but his face looked different, more tired, more sad. "He's getting worse," David said, without preamble. Emily nodded. She knew. They all knew. "How much time do the doctors give him?" David swallowed hard. "Weeks, maybe a month." Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that hurts. "Do you want me to keep playing?" Emily asked, in a soft voice. David looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Please." And so, Emily played. Every day, even when Ernest no longer opened his eyes, even when he no longer moved his fingers, even when the doctors said he probably wasn't hearing anything anymore. because Emily knew something the doctors didn't. She knew that music doesn't just enter through the ears, it enters through the soul. Ernest died on a Thursday morning at 7:20 October. The sky was grey outside, as if the world knew something important was ending. Emily was playing Clair de Lune on the studio piano, the same notes she'd played 762 days before. The circle was closing. David was holding his grandfather's hand. He felt the exact moment the pulse stopped, when the breathing ceased, when Ernest was no longer there. But Emily kept playing. She finished the piece, all the notes, down to the last one, because Ernest deserved that. He deserved to leave with music. When the last chord faded into the air, there was silence, the kind of silence that's definitive, the kind of silence that says something beautiful has just ended. David wept silently, with his grandfather's hand still in his. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel he was late. He didn't feel he had failed, because this time he had been present. Emily closed the blue notebook. On the last page she wrote, "Day 762. Today I played Clair de Lune for the last time. He didn't open his eyes, but he smiled. I'm sure he smiled. And I know Sophia was waiting for him on the other side, with music. Rest, maestro. Your symphony is complete." The funeral was small, intimate, only close family and a few former students from the conservatory. But at the end, an elderly woman approached David. She had to be about 80 years old, white hair, kind eyes. "You're the grandson," she said. "The one he raised." David nodded, not trusting his voice. "I was your grandfather's student 40 years ago. He changed my life. He taught me that music isn't just technique, it's soul. And I want you to know something." The woman paused, with tears in her eyes. "Your grandfather always talked about you. Always. He said you were his pride, that it didn't matter, that you hadn't chosen music, because you had chosen to build things, to build a future. And that's also art." David felt something break inside him, in a good way. "Thank you," he managed to say. The woman squeezed his hand. "No, thank you, for taking care of him at the end, for not leaving him alone." But David knew the truth. He hadn't taken care of his grandfather. Not really. Emily had. Emily, with her blue notebook, her silent mornings, and her love that asked for nothing in return. After the funeral, David and Emily sat in the studio. The piano was still open. The sheet music was still there, but now there was a different silence, the silence of something that ended. "What are you going to do now?" David asked. Emily looked at the blue notebook in her hands. "Keep going. There are 200 patients waiting. 200 families who need what we had here." David nodded. Then he asked something he'd wanted to ask for months. "Why did you do it? Not just with my grandfather. Why did you decide to dedicate your life to this?" Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When she answered, her voice was soft but firm. "Because my father died alone in a hospital, confused, scared, not remembering who he was, and I wasn't there. I was working, earning money to pay the hospital bills, and when I arrived, it was too late. So I swore I would never let that happen to anyone else. That if I could, I would be present. I would be there, with music, with love, with whatever was needed." David felt tears running down his face. "I'm so sorry." Emily shook her head. "Don't be. Your grandfather gave me the opportunity to fulfill that promise, and you gave me the resources to do it on a large scale, so thank you." "No," David said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for teaching me that success isn't measured in buildings, it's measured in moments, in the 8 notes my grandfather played after 8 years, in the 3 seconds of lucidity that gave hope to a family, in the 762 mornings in which you chose to be present." 3 years after Ernest's death, the Maestro Ernest Salazar Foundation had 5 locations across Mexico. It employed 50 music therapists, It served 500 patients with dementia a year, free of charge. Emily was still the director, but now she was also co-author of 3 scientific studies published in international journals. The Ernesto Protocol had been adopted by hospitals in 15 countries, and David was still playing piano. He never got good, but that didn't matter, because once a month, he went to the Foundation's studio. He sat down at the piano, and he played Clair de Lune for the patients who were there, imperfect, with mistakes, but with all his soul. And now and then, someone moved their fingers in the air. Someone whispered a name. Someone smiled. And David knew that his grandfather would be proud, not because he had built a foundation, not because he had donated millions, but because he had finally learned the lesson that Ernest spent his whole life trying to teach him. That the value of a life isn't measured in what you accumulate, it's measured in what you give, in the moments in which you choose to be present, in the love you leave behind. You have 2 options now. You can close this video and go on with your life as if nothing happened, or you can remember that there's someone in your life who's slowly disappearing, someone who maybe needs you to be present, see him, hear him, not tomorrow, today, because time waits for no one, and dementia shows no mercy. What's your Clair de Lune going to be? What song are you going to play before it's too late? Emily's blue notebook keeps growing. Now there are 15 notebooks, one for each branch of the foundation, thousands of pages, thousands of stories, thousands of moments that the medical community said were impossible. But Emily knows something that doctors are just beginning to understand. Music doesn't cure dementia, but it can reach the soul. When the brain no longer functions, it can bring back, even if just for seconds, the person we love. It can give us a last goodbye, a last smile, a last word. And sometimes, that's all we need. A moment, a second, a single note to know that they're still there, that they still love us, that they never really forgot us. They were just lost in the fog, waiting for someone to play the right song, the song that would bring them home, even if it's just one last time. And that song, more often than you think, is right in your hands. You just have to be willing to play it.